Hey everybody, so today we're going to be installing my Wilwood big brake system into my 2005 GTO. So let's get started. Alright, so it is a little bit later at night. I actually started on the other side first. I figured I'd get that done before I started filming just to kind of work the bolts out of nuts and bolts out of it, not to be cute, but because I had a hunch this wouldn't be just a simple take the old parts off, put the new parts on kind of thing. And it's still pretty simple, but there is some test fitting and shimming you have to do, so we'll talk about that in a minute. So, okay. All right, so why am I doing this? So I've had my GTO now for about, geez, going on 20 years. I mean, I bought it new back in 2005, and I've been slowly working on it ever since. And there really are good cars out of the box, but there are a few things that you do want to improve. The brakes and the suspension are probably the two big ones, right? And so the suspension's decent, but the stock rear springs are a little weak, and you get a lot of squat on acceleration, so you definitely want to switch those out. And the stock brakes aren't the greatest. The stock calipers actually aren't bad, certainly for the time, but the stock rotors that they come with warp fairly easy under hard braking. So I've been rocking DBA rotors and Hawk pads for the longest while now, and they've been absolutely fine. So, you know, if you want to upgrade your brakes on a budget, they work just fine. But I've decided to go with something a little bit flashier, something a little bit bigger with the Wilwood. So here we go. So the first thing you want to do is go ahead and disconnect your brake line, which is here. You're going to go ahead and hit that guy with a little bit of liquid wrench, and if you have them, use your line wrenches for that, because you don't want that little nut to round off, because you're going to have a hell of a time if you do. So, all right, so we'll do that, and we'll be back in a minute. Now, one thing that's a little bit weird about the GTO is that it is an Australian platform with American drivetrains. So some of the parts are standard, some of the parts are metric. So to get this guy off, you're going to want to use a 10 millimeter line wrench for that. All right, so once you get that off, you want to go ahead and disconnect the brake line from here where it's with the attached to my strut there, along with the speed sensor for the ABS system. So there should be a metal bracket on here, a little clip, but I lost mine years ago, so no big deal. You need to just turn that line and it'll come out. Oh, I'm sorry, before you do that, you have to unscrew that bolt right there, and then it'll come out. So once again, 10 millimeter socket, it'll come out. All right, so once you got that off, you want to go ahead and remove your brake caliper bracket. You want to remove the whole assembly from your spindle. These two bolts here, they're 22 millimeter. You're going to want to go ahead and retain those two bolts, because you're going to need them for when you put the new brake system in. And then go ahead and retain that bolt there too, because you're going to need it for the new Wilwood braided brake lines. All right, so just a word or two on getting the old brake line out. There is a flat portion that you need to kind of turn to engage to slide out of the bracket. On the other side, it was really easy. On this side, it was actually kind of a pain. So if it's giving you some grief, just go ahead and take that banjo nut off the caliper, and then, you know, finagle it. It'll make it easier to finagle out. So. Okay, so here's where kind of the pain in the ass portion begins. So, next thing you're going to want to do, so I got everything off, right? So brake line's undone, old caliper's off, old rotor is off. I didn't show that because, I mean, come on, I don't want to insult your intelligence, but all right, so now what you're going to do is get this bracket where the new caliper is going to go. It's going to go on the spindle like so, but you got a bunch of hardware here. So you're going to retain your stock mounting bolts that you took off from the original caliper. You have some shims here. Now these are going to be used to shim the bracket inboard and outboard from the spindle, so the caliper stays centered on the new rotor. I'll show you that in a second. On the other, how many is kind of a guess. That's just where the test fitting comes in. On the other side, it took me 2 on each bolt, so that's probably where I'll start with. So, and then you have the hardware here. So this is for mounting the caliper onto the new bracket. So it comes with these metal bushings. You won't need those unless you have an 04. I don't know why you end up needing those for an 04. For whatever reason, the instructions say so. I didn't need it for mine because it's an 05. You will need these black bushings. Those are the mounting hardware there. And then you have these shims here to basically shim the caliper at the right height off of the bracket here. And I'll show you that here in a second. So that's what all of this here is for. It's going to require a little bit of test fitting, like I said, which was kind of a pain the first time around, but honestly, it's not that bad. So, all right, we'll be back in a minute. I'll show you all that stuff. All right, so now I got my bracket ready to go onto the spindle, and like I said, I'm starting off with two shims just because that's what it was on the other side, and you'll test it. Now, what I did is I do have my calipers here. I was kind of testing the how centered the rotor was in between the caliper. I'll show you that. I don't know if you really needed to do that because where the rubber met the road on that one was whether or not the brake pads fit in smoothly or not. So that's what really was the test on that. So all right, we'll be back in a minute. All right, so there the bracket's on. Don't torque it down, don't Loctite it yet, just snug it up because, like I said, you're going to end up doing some test fitting and you might have to add and remove a shim. So just kind of snug it up for now. All right, so next thing you want to do is prep your rotor and install the hat onto the rotor. The rotor, I do want to point this out, the rotor is one of two components to this that are directional, right? So there is I don't know how well you can see that, but there is an arrow there that shows you the direction of forward rotation, so just make sure you pay attention to that when you put these on. So I said you got the rotor, the hat, and then it comes with the hardware in order to install it. And Wilwood is very adamant about this. This gets torqued to 155 inch-pounds. They only want you using inch-pounds. Apparently don't convert it to foot-pounds or anything like that. So prep all this. They say do use red Loctite with it. So when you put on the hardware. So we'll be back in a minute. All right, so once you got your rotor and hat assembled, just go ahead and put it on the spindle and just use a couple lug nuts, hand tight, to keep it in place. And then next you're going to go ahead and put on your caliper and start some test fitting. Now this is, use a little bit of caution here because this is the other component on this set that is directional. So if you look inside, you'll notice one of the pistons on either side is larger than the other. You want to make sure the largest piston is on the exiting side as the rotor rotates in the forward direction. So does that make sense? That's the way the instructions explain it. It makes sense. So like I said, I'm here on the left side of the vehicle. The tire, the rotor rotates this way in the forward direction. So the the largest pistons are going to be on the downside like that. And so that's how you know it's on the correct side. So be careful about that. All right, so now you're going to start the test fitting. So you are going to shim the caliper, but for now, just put those, if you can see that, put those little black spacers on there and one shim to start with, and then put the rotor on top of that, or caliper on top of that. So there it is, my caliper is sort of in there for test fitting. And what you want to do is ensure that the rotor is sitting kind of equal distance between the sides of the caliper. And like I said, I used my digital calipers there to measure it. I don't know how important that was. What really functionally meant the difference was how easily the brake pads slid in and out of there. If you need to adjust it in and out to even it out, that's when you add more shims onto in between the mounting bracket and the spindle that I showed there. All right, so I measured it out. It was about 17 on one side, 15 or so on the other. And as you can see, the brake pad slid in really easy on that side, but on this side, not as much. So I'm gonna have to add a shim. All right, so back at it again. It is actually a couple days later. Actually ran into a problem. So interesting, when Wilwood sent me the kit, they actually sent me one of these brackets was the wrong one. So this one is actually for the 13-inch brakes, not the 14-inch. So it was really interesting. It was packaged in the same package. It was the part number for the 14-inch bracket, but it was just the wrong one. So okay, fine. Got packaged wrong at the factory, so I had to wait. I had to order another one, or had them send me the right one, and got this back together. So don't hate me in the comments section if I didn't do step by step on this, just because it is. I think it's about a week later at this point. So okay, but this assembly's on here now, and it's looking good. What you have to do, and I'm just going to use this one here to give an example. You have to shim this thing correctly, right? You have to shim the bracket correctly away from the spindle to fit the caliper, and then you have to shim the caliper up from the bracket appropriately to where it fits to the it's not too high or not too low on the whatchamacallit rotor. How you end up doing that is basically you get these big washers and you shim here, you know, as in moving it out from the spindle. Once you get that appropriate, and basically, like I was saying before, you kind of just get it to where the, you can really just kind of eyeball it to where the rotor is right in the middle. And like I said, use the brake pads as kind of your guide on that. You don't have to bust out your digital calipers like I did. It's a little bit too much, and you really don't need it. And so where the rubber meets the road is that the brake pads slide in and out easily. And you'll know, I mean, it'll be very obvious. You shouldn't have to like fight with it to get them in there. And then the rotor should spin freely. Then once you do that, you need to add these black spacers, and then you, however many shims you need of these guys on top of that, like so, to get it to where the, hold on, let me see if I can get some light in there so you can see. Get it to where the top of the brake pad is relatively flush with the top of the rotor. You get that in there appropriately. You know, so it's not too bad, but it was a little bit of a pain. So hopefully this kind of helped, because the instructions were good. They just weren't great. So, okay, some tips. Number one, what I found is that, yep, if you just, like you can see here, if you just turn your wheels out to where you can see into the caliper, it's going to make your life a whole lot easier. The other thing is, so the instructions basically say just to put the rotor on and like hand tighten your lugs, which I did, but I got to tell you, it was getting really hard to shim, and I was really fighting with it, and it just wasn't really making any sense. So what I did is I just snugged them down lightly. I snugged them down, you know, with a socket and ratchet to kind of get it more onto the spindle, and then it fit right in, and it was good to go. So like I said, I would basically I would just snug these up with a socket. That'll get on there, and then this will all go together very easily. Like I said, you did them hand tight originally, and normally I would agree. I mean, that's kind of how I've usually done it, but it was just a pain. It was just not working, and like I said, I just kept futzing with this, trying to shim it correctly. But once I snug these up, it worked fine. So I'm gonna double check the other side real quick, make sure that's good, and then I'll start working on the lines and all this other stuff. So it's getting there. Like I said, it's not. This isn't terribly hard. There's just more to it than take the old pieces off, put the new pieces on. So hopefully this video is helping a little bit. All right, so next thing we're going to do is hook up the brake lines. So now, unfortunately, you are not going to be able to use your stock brake lines with your Wilwood kit, because the banjo bolts just will not work with this. And plus, you don't want to use the rubber hoses anyway, because they'll expand and they just won't really work. So what you really want to do is use these braided ones. Now this Wilwood provides you with a kit. Pretty much comes with everything you need. You know, the fittings, bracket, and the little clip, and the line itself. So we're going to start putting this together here, and I'll be right back. All right, so you can see kind of what I got going on here now. So you are going to have to gently bend your stock brake lines a little bit to get these to fit. Not much, but just a little bit. Comparing to the other side, I personally think it's easier to assemble everything with the bracket and the line, the braided line and your stock line, kind of like I did here, and then gently maneuver this into place, as opposed to put the bracket on and then try to finagle the stock line in there. It just worked a lot easier on this side doing it this way than on the other side. Like I said, on the other side, I put the bracket on, put this hose on, and then try to, and it wasn't bad, but it was still kind of pain. It's just a lot easier to do this way. So like I said, you will have to kind of gently bend this a little bit, so be careful. Not a lot, but these are universal lines, unfortunately, so they're not like direct fit. So you do have to do a little bit of maneuvering, but it's not bad. So. All right, one thing that I forgot is when you're putting in these lines, the NPT fittings, so make sure you use thread tape on the NPT portion that goes into the caliper, and then you can use just thread sealer on that conical tapered end or whatever that goes into the brake line itself. So, but don't forget that. You got to put thread tape here, and then thread sealer on there. All right, so I got everything back together, and I just got done bleeding the brakes. I didn't make a video on that because I figured there's a lot. If you don't know how to do it, especially if you don't know how to do it without a helper, there's a bunch of videos here on YouTube that can show you how. But I just want to point out, bear in mind with these Wilwood brakes, you have a bleeder screw on either side of the caliper, right? And you have to bleed both of them. I made that mistake with the Stop Tech brakes on my GTR. And because if you don't bleed both of them, you'll never get air out of the system. So just remember to bleed both to get all the air out of the system. So I'm gonna let this sit overnight and then check for leaks tomorrow after work, change my oil, and then put everything back together and do a little bit of a brake test on them. And I'll let you know how things go. All right, we'll see you then. All right, then boom, there's the finished product, right? All put back together, brakes bled, tested them a bit, and everything seems fine. I'll go for a full road test tomorrow, but that's it. One thing I do want to mention, I do have 19-inch ROH Drift Rs, and I had zero fitment issues. You can see I got plenty of clearance in there. But if you had anything less than a 19-inch, you would probably have some serious issues, so keep that in mind. But anyway, like I said, wasn't too bad. There was some ins and outs to it. It wasn't a simple parts on, parts off thing, but all in all, pretty easy. So hope that helps, and have a good night, everybody. We'll see you next time.